Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the OIS Podcast. My name is Sophia Pathai, MD, PhD, and I'm delighted to host a wonderful panel of venture capitalists from across Europe who are going to deep dive into the ophthalmology medical tech space. We have Diana Saraceni from Milan, Panakes Partners. We have Jen McMahon from Seroba Life Sciences in Dublin. And we have Klaus Stockemann, Peppermint VenturePartners in Berlin. So thank you all so much for joining us. What I think is going to be very interesting for me, but I hope, and for all of our audience too, is to learn not only about what you're doing now, but about your non-linear career in venture capital. And the reason I say that is because I've come to learn through my time in the venture space that nearly every venture capitalist I've met has done something quite unique that's brought them to where they are in their career right now, which is pretty difficult and very different to how a medic does their career. We basically get told what we're told to do and we do it. So what I'd love to do is start with you, Diana. Welcome to the show. We'd love to hear a bit more about you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And I understand the non-linear definition applies to me, definitely, the non-linear career. I started as a mechanical engineer and added an MBA to it. And certainly I didn't have at that point the idea of becoming a venture capital. I did some strategic consulting afterwards and some advisory in the investment banking world. And from there, especially 20 years ago, when the venture capital industry was in a sort of a very active time and sort of building its foundation into Europe, I decided to move into venture. And I had the opportunity over time, over the last 20 years, to co-found two investment companies, one of which is 360 Capital, investing in all sectors, primarily in digital. And more recently, I also co-founded Panakes, which I lead today, which is a venture capital firm investing primarily in medical device, and now with the new fund also in therapeutics everywhere around Europe, and with in early stage innovative company, and is very active in ophthalmology as well, in looking for a deal in the space. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you, Diana, for sharing that. I'm sure we've got lots more to ask you about that, indeed, non-linear career. But before we deep dive, I just want to take the opportunity now to welcome Jen. So Jen, thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to hear more about your career.
Thanks, Sophia, and thank you for inviting me on. I'm delighted to be on the podcast and to discuss with such a great panel here. So I would agree. I mean, I think a linear path in venture is unusual. So my background is in pharmacology with a master's in biotechnology and business. And I think from an early age, I was always interested in healthcare. My mum actually was born deaf, so she didn't realize she was deaf until she was 8 or 9, when in school teachers realized that she was slower on the uptake. Then they said, let's send her for a hearing test. And lo and behold, she was born clinically deaf. But she learned to lip read from a really early age. So it's funny how much she relies on her eyes for both sight and for hearing, which I think is pretty spectacular. But I guess from a young age, I was always aware of sort of inadequacies in health and how we don't have the same opportunities, albeit she's done pretty well for herself. So it hasn't held her back in any way. And then since that, I knew I wanted to do something in healthcare, but wasn't sure what. So during my pharmacology studies, I actually worked as a healthcare assistant, so carer in a nursing home for the blind, actually. So again, there's this sort of link to ocular innovation or care, if you will, through the early years. And that, again, was just another eye-opening experience to see the limitations where patients with very common ophthalmic conditions were poorly treated, and they had a really poor quality of life in some instances. So then I decided to go into a PhD in biotech and business, knowing that I wanted to focus on the commercial aspect of innovation with scientific innovation. during that master's, I met a partner at Seroba called Alan O'Connell. I asked him, could I do an internship because I wanted to learn more? And I was very much a naive scientist who thought venture capital sounds cool. Went in to do an internship, and when I was actively interviewing for other kind of corporate roles, graduate programs really. And when I was offered one, Seroba said, well, would you like to stay? Fast forward 10 years later, I guess I started as an analyst. I'm partner now at Seroba, and it's been a great journey. So I haven't gone into venture by design. I've kind of fallen into it, but it's such a great career path. I've been very fortunate to do so.
Jen, thank you for sharing that and being so candid about your personal journey as well, about your mother. And what's very interesting is I found from the founder perspective, and probably a lot of our panelists have too, often founders are really motivated by a personal experience or by that of their loved ones that can really give them a reason to do what they're doing. So it sounds like that's pretty similar for your case too. And also what we'll touch upon later on is about the network environment, I would say, in venture capital, and how you mentioned it was just like a chance meeting and then an internship that led to you now being a partner. So very interesting aspects that I want to dive into later on. But for now, I've saved Klaus for last, and that's because I know him pretty well, as of course I'm a venture partner at Peppermint VenturePartners. But Klaus, for everyone who's listening, please would love to hear more about your journey.
Yeah, so I think my journey was a bit different. So after my PhD in pharmacology and biochemistry, I worked with Sanofi, or former Höchst, and they offered me a very interesting position in research. And then I moved on to Schering in Berlin, where I worked in research. And I did that for quite a while, developing new pharmaceuticals, actually in female health. I got so frustrated that I thought, I can't do that my whole life. And I was thinking, well, you have to do something which is not frustrating you, but which is giving you more excitement. I then did an MBA at Northwestern Kellogg. And when I came back from that one, I did know that I have to do something differently. So I ended up joining 3i in London and in Germany before I started venture capital with some colleagues in 2010. So I'm doing now venture capital since more than 20 years. And what drives me is really translation of research in the medical space, create new products, and really treat diseases to make a better place.
Thanks, Klaus.
The Ophthalmology Innovation Summit is back in a big way with OIS 12 being held at the Hard Rock Hotel in San Diego on December 2nd and 3rd. Get ready for our rocking time networking and having fun while expanding your knowledge and making new connections. For more information on presenting or attending, visit OIS.net today.
Thanks, Klaus. And I think what I want to do really is dig a little deeper into those motivations, because I know at Peppermint we have a portfolio that is well constructed towards the MedTech space. So I really want this forum today to deep dive around the MedTech space. Plus we can touch on therapeutics and ophthalmology. So tell me, from your perspective, what's been really important for you when you think about ophthalmology MedTech? How do you see it playing out over the next 5 to 10 years? And what are the challenges and opportunities, particularly thinking about aspects like MDR, that maybe the evidence case or base for digital health? I mean, I think Rock Health had some very nice data where they showed when you look at digital health outcomes, there's not often a robust evidence base from which to draw conclusions. So I know you're a strong proponent of MedTech and digital health, but tell us more about why you have the conviction in the space and particularly in ophthalmology.
Well, I think we all always looked into ophthalmology for a long time, and we as you know, we are doing more medical devices and digital health rather than drugs. That will change soon, I guess. And then I think we were driven by the fact that we believe it's an underserved market, really, and it has in the last couple of years really shown that they are at the forefront of innovations, right? And we were really thrilled by the fact that you can test out certain new technologies, whether this is gene therapy, whether it's just engineering, actually, and move into the eye as a closed organ, let's call it like a closed organ, and be very quick to get first proof of concept data. that was one thing which did drive us into this space. And then, of course, when you talk about digital health, all of us here on the panel have seen hundreds of cases, thousands of cases. Meanwhile, in the digital health space, we look at that very carefully because a lot of companies have not proven really their utility. You all have seen Lumniopia in the US, who made it for lazy eye in a PMA or in an FDA trial, and now are actually on the market, which is because we have a similar company in our portfolio. Very interesting that they were able to convince the FDA to get approval for a digital therapeutic approach for lazy eye, which was not seen 10 years ago, right? So we do like this disruptiveness approaches in ophthalmology. That's from the theme base, and then of course the M&A market and the potential to exit these companies is I think quite good. You just have seen an interesting deal, iStar in Belgium. Everybody has seen it. I found the deal structure interesting, which I didn't understand completely, whether they became shareholder with just invest 60 million to later pay 470 million. So that as such is a very, very interesting news here for Europe. And we believe that, again, in Europe, not a lot of VCs are really focusing on ophthalmology. I know Diana and Jen, you are looking into it, but if you take it seriously compared to the US, it's more opportunistic rather than really strategic.
Thank you, Klaus. And actually, panel, I did not plant that question with Klaus about iStar, but that is a wonderful, kind of event that's happened just in the last 24 hours, I would say. So thank you for raising that. And I think it's great to see Belgian MedTech translate across to the US. And you raised an important point about the translation of therapeutics and approval in the US space. And I think maybe we can talk about this a bit later on, about the relationship between the US and Europe when it comes to levels of innovation, but also to regulatory approvals. But just thinking now about therapeutics, Diana and Jen, I want to open it up to both because we've exchanged emails as well about deals which are MedTech, and I know you do some deals in therapeutics as well. So would love to know your thoughts aligned to Klaus about your passion or what you feel is exciting about ophthalmology MedTech, but would love to take this opportunity as well to know if you have any excitement around therapeutics. And Diana in particular, I know that in Milan, you have Avant-Garde Therapeutics backed by Sophia Partners, and you have a plethora of therapeutics in the retina space as well, particularly in inherited retinal diseases. So would love to know from that Italian perspective as well, how that excites you.
Sure, I'm going to take the question, Dan, and I think what I'm going to say about ophthalmology will largely apply to both medical devices and therapeutic, actually, because I mean, just the very basic fundamentals you need on a venture capital deal are quite well represented in the segment. To start with, big markets. Not all the indication represent big markets, but there are enough, and there are a few. I mean, the by far the largest surgery procedure performed on patient is cataract in the world. Glaucoma patients are a huge market. Refractive surgery in most of the various aspects and indication. You can easily find big markets there, and a few others. So I mean, that is one pillar for a venture capital deal, and again, it applies to most of the time to both medtech and therapeutics. What we also like, probably I also like, is the attitude of the ophthalmologist. They are, I think, by far, if not but by far one of the most active and entrepreneurial segment in the space.
Yes.
They like innovation, they adopt innovation, they embrace it really. So it's not like other medics categories where companies do sometimes really struggle. I won't mention the ones that do really struggle to have their innovation adopted, even when it make perfect sense. I also like that there are some segments which are out of pocket. think of refractory and surgeries and alike, then it's interesting for me, and not to be in a world that's more sort of patient/consumer. And I mean, it's easier to sort of understand from a business model perspective. Sometimes it's easier for us, and specifically probably the players are very acquisitive. In general, they like to buy innovation, and it doesn't happen in all segments. And just on a closing note, that is more for the medical devices or part of the world rather than for therapeutics. There's plenty of procedural things. There's plenty of procedures. So there's need for tools. There's need to do there's need to do to microtize because I mean simply it's one of the smallest organ treated in surgery. So to microtize procedures, and I mean companies that make perfect sense to me, like the very latest news we heard on robotics, on the Foresight robotic raising 55 million, doesn't surprise me, because it's a big need to sort of be able to simplify a procedure on such a small environment like the eye is. So definitely an interesting space and an opportunity to make money, which is our main driver.
Wonderful insights. And, I think you've made a lot of friends in the audience by saying how innovative and excited ophthalmologists get about new tech. And I think, jokes aside, I really do think ophthalmologists love just to play with new toys. They get excited about the tech and they always want to try something new. And I think that's a characteristic of being an ophthalmologist in some ways. And I've worked in different therapeutic areas in the pharma industry. And you're right, there is a certain, I guess, characteristic element which really rides along with the ophthalmology personality. And thanks for highlighting the important deal that we saw in robotic surgery. And you're right, cataract surgery is the most commonly performed surgery in the world. And I think to see all what's happening with CMR Surgical as well, with robotic surgery, but also I think teaching and training. And so you see early stage companies like Proximie, I think in the UK, which are doing some kind of AR or VR learning in a virtual environment. I think, I'm sure we're going to have a podcast on the metaverse in due course, but I think what's wonderful is ophthalmology can embrace all of these elements. And with that, Jen, I want to move on to you, because you and I have exchanged a lot of notes on different deals, some that we've been looking at together, and some which maybe you have a particular perspective on from the Seroba side. So tell me, what makes you feel excited about the MedTech deals, and in the therapeutics, what are you quite hot on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So I should have actually given an intro to Seroba at the start. I omitted that. So Life Science Venture Fund, and as you said, looking at both medtech and therapeutics opportunities across life sciences. And I particularly like ophthalmology for many of the reasons that Diana has laid out. I mean, the market opportunity is huge. I love that you can address some of these indications with several different modalities. So you've got the surgical tools, you have the med tech, you now have sensors and monitoring for some of the chronic conditions that are becoming more and more prevalent. And then you have, you've got your therapeutics arm, and now even more important, gene therapy being a big modality in therapeutics. So what I think is quite interesting about ophthalmology is that when you're a fund that invests in both therapeutics and in medtech, you get the privilege of seeing innovation on both sides of the spectrum. But it can also be a challenge, because I think sometimes you get drawn in by the novelty of innovation in an area, and then you think, wait a second, are we overcomplicating it for this one indication? Because ophthalmology, there's so many conditions that are happening earlier and earlier in life now because of the way we're living our lives, and the fact that we spend, 60% of our day looking at a screen in many cases. Kids aren't spending time outside and aren't getting the visual feedback they need for long-sighted vision, not getting light. And these are all having big impacts on our vision overall. And I think because of that, sometimes I need to be cognizant that something is really innovative, but actually, there are simple solutions out there. So sometimes you can be drawn into things that aren't necessarily a fit for any one indication, I think. But I totally agree that ophthalmologists are a really savvy bunch of clinicians, a little bit like, in cosmetics. And I think that's also driven, as Diana said, by the fact that there is a self-pay component to this market. Again, another big attraction for VCs, because if something isn't yet covered by reimbursement, there's a strong chance that this is a really motivated patient cohort who are demanding more durable and more effective solutions to their conditions. So I think that's really attractive. I think the lifestyle component, as I said, unfortunately, we are getting eye disease younger and younger. And there's specific territories like Asia Pacific where you're seeing, school children having particular eye conditions that shouldn't be the case, but we're seeing that there's a growing demand. So that's something that is attractive for investors. There's also, a large number of active corporates. I will say, though, they don't seem to invest together in many cases. So unlike in cardiology, where you might have 2 or 3 of the big players coming in, or oncology in the therapeutic side of things, we are probably held a little bit more hostage by the corporates when it comes to a corporate investment, which might leave companies a little bit more vulnerable. But look, they're active from an investment perspective. So that is certainly very positive. But it's an area that I think VCs, they tend not to avoid anymore. I think there's huge wins to be made here, and the unmet need is enormous. So, it's great to be investing in the field.
I love those insights, Jen, especially the global perspective you took as well. And, the data about myopia, and it really being an epidemic of myopia in Asia Pacific. In fact, I think 2 days ago, there was a paper that was published, I think in the JAMA, but it was like an OIS International in collaboration with some academics. They found that, of course, there's this increased epidemic of myopia, but with that, there's increased anxiety and depression in these kids. So I think, we're obviously talking about ophthalmology today, but I think it's very worthwhile reminding ourselves that there are other effects that come from vision and vision disorders. So thanks for raising those points. And I think you also raised a very pertinent point, which I want to pick up further with Klaus and Diana. Looking at, venture capital over the years, you're both very seasoned investors in the space. And of course, Jen, you've had a lot of expertise as well. But Klaus and Diana, how do you think the role of the venture capitalist is evolving? And in terms of, as Jen pointed out, relationships with, corporate strategics, but also we're seeing many family offices now who want to invest early stage in healthcare. And over the last 2 years, we also saw some of the so-called medical tourists who would come and invest, in early stage biotech. And then lately, over the last 6 months or so, they've had a bit of a scare. So how do you find your vision, and how has that changed over the time you've been in venture? So maybe Klaus, I'll start with you, and then we'll move over to Diana.
I think Jen made an interesting point, or was Diana, on the entrepreneurial spirit of ophthalmology. Right? We have seen in our portfolio companies that in all of them, ophthalmologists have been co-investing alongside us, right? That hasn't been the case 15 years ago, right? This has significantly changed that. And you can ask the question, do you really want that, right? But that's the flip side of the coin. You get the experience, the money, and then you have to deal with the guys who are very outspoken sometimes, right? But you have to deal with people.
Klaus, you're pretty outspoken sometimes too, so that's
but they always these are outspoken, as you know. So you have a nice bunch of people sitting around and trying to bring innovation to the market. But to the point, I think things have changed, and I think to the better, because now you can mix your investor base not purely by institutional investors, rather than with people with passion and knowledge. And I think the last one, the knowledge part, you hardly can underestimate, because you can do so much wrong, as we all know here on the call, which kicks you back 2 years or something like that, and it takes so long. So I think the investor base has changed. Family offices, I would say, are very interesting candidates. However, I have to say, you have to search for ones who are there for the long run, right? Because it is really sometimes taking quite a long time to get an innovation to the market. And therefore, that's more true for healthcare in general, is that Also, this MIG device we're talking about, iStar, was not developed in a year, right? They're running now a PMA trial, right? It takes another 2 years, etc. So you have to be clear that it's for the long run. And therefore, I think compared to 15 years ago, you find more and more people who understand that and then make the decision that they want to go in healthcare. And I think that's a good outlook for the future.
As candid as ever, Klaus, but no, very insightful as well. So thank you so much. And let's pass it over to Diana.
Yeah, sure. If I look at the last 20 years, obviously, this industry has been growing steadily with cycles, but with cycles, right? There are moments where there's sort of hype and there's a lot of liquidity coming in, different moments like now, for example, where the exits are more difficult, the industry is a bit drying up of some, how did you call them, the tourist, the medical.
Well, I think the Financial Times that wrote an article, and they nicely called them tourists, and yeah.
Right, I like the definition. And so, but overall, keep steadily growing. And there's one thing that Klaus mentioned that is pretty clear, is that building up this way, there is much more experience and expertise at service. I'm talking about European venture, of course. There's much more specific expertise which will serve the purpose of not only putting more money into startups, but providing the right guidance. And we are almost in the process of reaching a point where funds will become specialized fund with a much narrow investment scope definition, even though I don't necessarily like it, because for each fund there will be a too limited deal flow. I mean, a fund that is only dedicated to one segment in the entire medical space, plus necessarily will have some opinion on the stage, on the geography, on some other features that will again limit the deal flow, will end up with a deal flow that is too limited. So maybe not going towards the focus of the entire fund, but going towards the focus of the single partner in a fund, which will bring a lot of expertise on a single segment. This, I believe, is a possible trend and something that will most likely happen in the future.
You know, Dan, you actually raised a topic which would be maybe a great idea for a future podcast, because Rob Rothman, who's another host on the podcast from Insight Capital Partners, In Focus Capital Partners, and Firas Rahal, of course, from Excite Ventures, right? These are funds that are absolutely specialists, and every partner in the fund is dedicated to the ophthalmology only fund. So maybe that would be a really interesting dialogue where your perspective is well taken, and I'd love to know what Firas and Rob think as well. So if you're up for it, maybe we should have another discussion in future around the value of a specialty ophthalmology or specialty fund.
Will do.
And I think what I want to think about now is to make this precious time with the three of you very valuable to our audience. And we do know we have a lot of folks who listen in who are either aspiring entrepreneurs or indeed already founders in the space. We've got a lot of CEOs who tell me that they actually listen in to the podcast, but I also get a lot of deal flow where folks are saying that they're in an early stage startup and they love listening to this podcast. So let's try and really provide some granular advice. So what I'd like to ask each of you is, when you're seeing a deal, and let's keep it focused to ophthalmology for the purposes of today, what do you like to see in a pitch, or what really makes you excited? And conversely, what makes you think, oh my goodness, I'm just not super excited about this? But also let's talk about the softer side as well, because that's one thing I've learned along the way. Tell me more about, how you feel about being contacted. Are you receptive to the so-called cold email, or do you want to take referrals? Because I know in the US this can be a kind of very formalized system of people reaching out. So how do you receive potential approaches in the space? And then when you do see a deal, what do you like to see? So let's try and make this as practically useful for our founders as possible. So Jen, why don't you start us off?
Sure, happy to kick off, and I'll try scratch the surface and the others can dig a little bit deeper. But I think for one of the kind of, and it is a little bit general, but in terms of one of the biggest pieces of advice that I try to give founders when they're going to a pitch to a VC is to understand the mechanics of VC and how it works, so that you can put yourselves in our shoes and understand what we want to hear. So, we have a pot of money from our LPs or our investors that we have to spend wisely to make a return for our investors. So therefore, the founder needs to come in and prove to us that they can help us get there. This isn't just our money. This isn't a pot of, our private wealth that we are deciding what to invest in. We need to make responsible investment decisions, and ones that make sense based on the context of our overall deal flow. So get us excited about the market opportunity, but understand that, capital in, where the exit might be. So having some predicate deals, I think, is always really helpful. But the other one piece of advice I always try to give to people is just to understand your position in the market. So that goes back to understanding, if you're a therapeutics entity or a gene therapy company, where are MedTech and surgical tools and ophthalmology playing? Don't overlook those as being competing technologies, but also understand what's in development. Because too often I see companies or, first-time CEOs come in and they only pitch what's on the market vis-a-vis what they're developing. But that's just not a fair competitive overview. You really need to be understanding what's going to be the competition when you're on the market. I think, what are the big no's for me? And it's easily said, but when there's a big hang up on valuation, it's the really tricky point to determine, because we're all investing, typically at a pre-revenue stage. So it's a difficult, decision to come to sometimes. But typically, we'll always work as part of a syndicate. So we work together with the syndicate partners on this piece. But if you have founders who are really set on high valuations, I think you need to understand the greater potential here, and you can do creative deals whereby at certain exit points there can be different ways to split the pie. But I think having being really steadfast on valuation from the outset can be challenging, particularly in a pre-seed or a Series A deal. And then finally, in terms of the soft side of things and contacting, at Seroba, we get our deals through a wide variety of opportunities, like the other VCs here on the call. And we have no aversion to cold calling. Obviously, it helps if you get an intro through someone we know, but I have absolutely no problem if someone reaches out to me with a cold email.
Your inbox is going to be flooded now. So.
One thing I will say, personally, I find the LinkedIn outreach a little bit harder to stay on top of, because it's not in my inbox. So getting through the inbox is one task. Getting through LinkedIn, they probably fall by the wayside a little bit more. But yeah, they would be the general things. And I'll let Diana and Klaus give some of the more detailed feedback.
Super helpful and practical as ever, Jen. Thank you. Yeah, Klaus, why don't you give us your pragmatic tips for future founders?
I mean, these days it's quite simple, right? I look at everything in ophthalmology. I don't care what it is. So people can dump me in my mailbox, whatever they have, right? If it has a headline longevity in ophthalmology, I will prioritize it at number one, right? But besides that small joke, seriously, no, we as everybody on the call got a lot of deals, and it's very difficult, to be honest, to categorize it if it's not coming through a referral, because you then have really to look at the case and basically judge it or compare it with the other deals you are looking at. And then you look at the team, the experience, and then you give points if you like, and suddenly you have only a few deals left which are meeting basic criteria. So I think this anonymous kind of contacting in a way is hard. During COVID, where we couldn't meet, it was even harder. Now everybody's going on conference, and I have to say, the ones I went, I met at least one or two people which really made my day, because they came up with a freaking new idea. I just met a clinician here in Berlin from Charité, who have a new solution of AMD, where he left me speechless after he told me. I even didn't tell you, Sophia, so far. But I think these are the things where I think we are very, very open. Unless actually we get referrals, we look really at each single lead quickly and think about whether we are wanting to progress it. We, as all of us using most likely CRM systems, you can always improve and saying no. So we tend now to say no very quickly. Yeah. And since the focus, because Jana said, if you are a general fund, it's much harder maybe to figure it out. Now, since we are so much focused, it's very easy to say no. and therefore my life has become much easier than it was when we looked at everything, basically.
That's super valuable, Klaus. And you're right. I think sometimes we need to remember that the no can be as helpful as the yes, right? The quick no. So, and I think maybe I've certainly been guilty of that, not getting to that no quick enough. But let's talk positive. So let's talk the more practicalities with Diana. I know you've been a wealth of information and guidance to me as I've navigated my path in venture. So I'd love to know what your practical tips are.
Thank you, Sophia. Referral for us not so important unless it's an ophthalmologist. I mean, unless it's come from a KOL. Okay, so that is relevant. Otherwise, I mean, the friend of the friend or the advisor that has worked with you in the past doesn't add much, frankly. Cold call will be also fine. Or sorry, unless it's another fund. We value a lot if it's coming from another fund, or if it's coming from a KOL. Any other way of trying to reaching us, it's worth a cold call. We are perfectly fine with cold calls. And what we like to see in pitches that would attract our attention is qualified people in the team, in the advisory group, in the medical advisory board. I mean, that is really what works as a referral for us. Is there is 1, 2, 3 if there are 1, 2, 3 KOLs on board, or management that has already successful story, build up successful stories or things that are similar, that works really as a referral in a sense. The 2 other things I can add. One is teams. It's something that I think all VCs would need a bit more help since the beginning to understand what team really bring to the table. I just don't like those presentations where the team says each team member is qualified by 1, 2, 3 keywords, like this guy has worked with Alcon and then with Bausch & Lomb, and that's not relevant. What has he really done that is relevant to this pitch? Great point. Sentence, yeah. But what is it? Okay, so he has run before the trial that led to the approval of this drug that is similar to what we're trying to develop. Full stop. That's all I need to know. That's it, right? Perfect. What is not just the CV, it's not the CV at all, it's what is relevant for your project. That would be extremely helpful. And sorry, the second thing is we're not always 100% on top of comparables, financial comparables ourselves. So it's sometimes it may really be helpful to say, well, why this segment is so hot? Where do you find this from a financial standpoint? That is very visible in this exciting exit on a product that is in our space that was sold for 400 million or $1 billion plus, or whatever the number is that makes the entire financial return exciting. And because the financial community really values strongly this segment, this would immediately attract our attention. We are financial investors after all. So that is something that's never in pitches. You never find comparable in the first pitch, and it should be there.
I'm sure, folks who are listening in are actually stopping and taking notes, or they're going to be replaying this, because this is such a wonderful amount of advice that each one of you has shared. And I know we could go on talking about MedTech and ophthalmology probably all afternoon, but we're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon. I want to keep these podcasts a little punchy. People are probably listening on their way to work. They may even have the podcast on in the OR, in the ophthalmology OR. So it'd be great to now just finish off with each one of you just sharing your particular area that you're really excited about for the future. So Klaus, I'm going to start with you because you mentioned longevity in ophthalmology. So maybe we'll give Diana and Jen a chance to think about like which area in particular is really getting them excited in ophthalmology. But why don't you start by just telling us, what's the deal with longevity in ophthalmology, apart from many ophthalmology conditions are suffered by older people, but I know you think there's a deeper dive behind that.
I think there's a deeper dive, and depending on how you phrase longevity, it's a bit overheated, the whole thing. But if you just take it in a different way and say that it includes prevention and prolonging to being healthy, this then suddenly embraces not only diagnostic, constant monitoring, but also genomic sequencing and what you learn about that. So if you ask me what I'm really thrilled of is really now, I didn't believe I could end up there, is gene editing. So I'm now reading everything about gene editing. So I think in a year now you can call me an expert. No, I'm kidding. But what you've seen now, for example, which has been done on reducing hypolipothia in the liver with gene editing in New Zealand, human trials, and you see that it works, gives you an outlook what you probably can do also in the eye. So everything around gene therapy or treating diseases with certain other mechanisms, whether that might be mitochondrial therapies, senolytic therapies, or everything epigenetic targets is something which really thrilled us. And I believe this is a quick run, at least, to get into the clinic and see whether it's working, which you hardly can do in any other indication, or other organ, if you like. Liver is yet now maybe an interesting example as well. So that is something where we believe that there is so much done in the development in the different research institutions across the globe that I'm really excited about what will come in the next 2 to 5 years on really halting diseases like AMD and especially AMD, right? And that's something we are really thrilled of. And again, now I have to call the Charité guy to tell me more about his idea.
So you're already, I can see, you're so excited, and you're right. You touched upon the holy grail of AMD, and we know that there are many companies and startups in the space who are looking at this. So yeah, you're right. I agree with you. It's definitely a space to watch, and great to hear your excitement on that. Why don't we move to Diana just to share final thoughts on your area that you're hot on in ophthalmology?
Sure, I'll try to be a little bit complementary to what Klaus just said and move to more to the MedTech space. And maybe I think there's a one opportunity in refractive surgery that recently opened up quite significantly. I mean, the holy grail of the sector, which is anything that treats presbyopia, was something, a kind of an indication that was put on hold for quite some time, waiting for this data to come out on the drop side. Now I think everybody understands that there could be still an opportunity for alternatives to drops, and lots of different innovative approach can benefit of this momentum, in my view, and not only in drug-driven approaches, but definitely in the device space. So this is one, and to mention another one, everything that's in robotic. I think it's in the sector, given that this need of very precise and accurate, precise, and minimum for several procedures. I think and robotic makes a lot of sense in general in ophthalmology, and we have seen several projects on their way to the market now. So these two segments would attract my attention at the moment. But again, I'm really open to several old companies in the sector.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your excitement. I think you're right. Those two areas are ripe for rapid expansion, and there will be huge segments where you'll really generate market returns. So share your excitement in that area too. Okay, Jen, why don't you close it out for us by telling us what your exciting areas of ophthalmology are?
Sure. I think at the moment, like many, I'm probably most excited by gene therapy opportunities. I think the capacity to leverage the one and done, ride on the coattails of some of the really exciting clinical data that's come to the fore in recent months and years, in gene therapy in this immune privileged area is a really exciting one. And then I think you've also got deals to prove that this is exciting. You look at the large Series A by Splice Bio and the likes. They're attracting capital from investors. Then you have the likes of the Gyroscope, Novartis, M&A, like huge deals. I think it's just an area where gene therapy can really excel. So I'm keeping a watchful eye here, but looking forward to seeing what the ophthalmology community brings.
Jen, you've said that so nicely. So Jen McMahon, Seroba VC in Dublin, Diana Saraceni, Panakes Partners in Milan, and Klaus Stockemann, Peppermint VenturePartners in Berlin. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Let's stay connected and look forward to hearing further insights in future.
Thanks, Sophia.
Thank you very much, Sophia, and all of you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the OIS Podcast. Tune in next week as we chat science, medicine, and industry with ophthalmology's leading experts. Visit OIS.net for more information on podcasts, events, and exciting new features.